the 7 Welsh families who dominated the coal, iron and trade unions of Great Britain. The Guest family built the largest ironworks in the world. In 1759, a man named John Guest arrived in Merthyr Tydfil, a small farming settlement at the northern end of the Taff Valley in South Wales, and began working at a newly established ironworks in a district called Dowlais. Nobody in the village could have predicted what that decision would produce. John Guest died in 1787 and was succeeded by his son Thomas, who introduced steam power to the furnaces in 1795 using a Watt engine, the first application of steam-driven blast power in the Welsh iron industry. Thomas was succeeded by his son Josiah John Guest, who took control of the Dowlais ironworks in 1807 and transformed it into something the industrial world had never seen. By the 1830s, under Josiah Guest's management, the Dowlais ironworks was the largest ironworks on the surface of the earth, employing more than 5,000 people and producing iron on a scale that had no precedent anywhere in history. The population of Merthyr Tydfil grew in direct proportion to the Guest family's ambition, from 7,700 in 1801 to 22,000 in 1831 to 46,000 in 1851, making it by that point the largest town in Wales, larger than Cardiff, larger than Swansea. Josiah Guest was elected as Member of Parliament for Merthyr Tydfil in 1832 and held the seat until his death in 1852. He was among the first industrialists in British history to combine direct political representation with industrial power on this scale. His wife, Lady Charlotte Guest, translated the Mabinogion, medieval Welsh legends, from Welsh into English, producing the definitive Victorian edition of the texts and becoming one of the most celebrated literary figures of her generation. After Josiah's death, she took personal management of the Dowlais works for a period, making her one of the first women to run a major industrial enterprise in British history. The Guest family's ironworks continued in production until the works were eventually absorbed by Guest, Keene and Nettlefold in 1902. The iron they produced had built railways across Britain, Europe and the Americas. The Crawshay family ruled Merthyr from Cyfarthfa Castle. The story of the Crawshay family begins not in Wales but in Yorkshire, where Richard Crawshay was born in 1739. He quarrelled with his father as a teenager, left home and walked to London over 20 days, arriving without money. He sold his pony for £15, found work in an iron warehouse, won his employer's confidence and eventually became sole proprietor of the business. Hearing of ironworks being established in South Wales, he arrived in Merthyr Tydfil, took over a lease at the Cyfarthfa works, and after the death of Anthony Bacon in 1786 secured control of the full Cyfarthfa operation. What he built there across the following decades was one of the most powerful industrial dynasties in British history. At the beginning of the 19th century, the Cyfarthfa Ironworks, owned by the Crawshay family, was the largest ironworks in the world, briefly surpassing even Dowlais before the Guest family overtook it. Richard Crawshay was succeeded by his son William Crawshay I, and then by William Crawshay II, who built Cyfarthfa Castle, a mock Gothic fortress completed in 1825 at a cost of approximately £30,000, which overlooked the ironworks and the town from the hillside above. The castle was a statement of power so explicit that it required no interpretation. The family that owned the furnaces owned the hill above them, and the castle on the hill declared that fact to every worker in the valley below. The Crawshay family's relationship with their workforce was consistently adversarial. They opposed the formation of trade unions, enforced the truck system that compelled workers to spend their wages in company-owned shops, and responded to labour disputes with dismissal and blacklisting. The family's iron production continued through multiple generations. William Crawshay III managed the works until a Great Depression in the iron trade and the development of the Bessemer converter for steel production made the old puddling furnace ironworks economically unviable. He died on the 10th of May 1879. His sons carried on under the name Crawshay Brothers until the works were absorbed by Guest, Keene and Nettlefold in 1902. The Crawshay family had ruled Merthyr Tydfil and dominated British iron production for over a century. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of our upcoming content about the United Kingdom and its history. Thank you for your support, and now let's continue. David Davies of Llandinum opened the Rhondda to the world. David Davies was born on the 18th of December 1818 in Llandinum, Montgomeryshire, a farming village in mid-Wales, a world away from the furnaces of the south. He was the eldest of 9 children of a farmer who died when David was 20 years old. He was self-educated and began work as a sawyer before moving into agricultural contracting. The turning point came in 1846 when he undertook work connected with the approaches and foundations of a bridge over the River Severn at Llandinam, and discovered in himself a talent for civil engineering and construction management that would reshape the industrial geography of Wales. Through the 1850s and early 1860s, Davies built railways across mid-Wales, including the Newtown and Llanidloes Railway, the Newtown and Machynlleth Railway, and numerous other lines. His greatest engineering achievement from this period was the Taladig cutting on the Newtown and Machynlleth Railway, completed in 1862, at that time the deepest railway cutting in the world. In 1864, Davies made the decision that would define his legacy. He took out a pioneering mineral lease in the Upper Rhondda Valley and began sinking coal pits. It took 2 years before the Park and Mendy collieries were in full production. He went on to form David Davies and Company in 1867, developing additional collieries including Dare in 1868, Western and Eastern in 1872, Gar in 1884 and Lady Windsor in 1885. The Ocean Coal Company was established as a limited liability company in the 1880s, by which time the output from Davies's collieries had grown to such volume that the Taffvale Railway and the Bute Docks at Cardiff could no longer handle it economically. Davies's response was to build his own railway and his own port. Barry Docks opened in 1889 and immediately transformed the export geography of South Wales coal. Within years, Barry had outgrown Cardiff as a coal export facility. David Davies died in 1890. His grandson David Davies I, Baron Davies, became a prominent Liberal politician and internationalist who helped fund the Temple of Peace in Cardiff and was a leading advocate for the League of Nations. John Nixon's collieries dominated the Cynon Valley for decades. John Nixon was born in 1815 in County Durham and came to South Wales as a young engineer in the service of the coal industry. His significance in Welsh coal history lies not primarily in the scale of his operations, though that was considerable, but in the technical and commercial decisions he made in the 1840s that determined the direction of the entire South Wales steam coal trade for the following half-century. In 1840, Nixon demonstrated conclusively that South Wales steam coal from the Cynon Valley could be burned directly in steamship boilers without the coking process that had previously been considered necessary, a demonstration that opened an entirely new global market for Welsh coal. Naval authorities, merchant shipping companies, and eventually the navies of France, Britain and their allies became convinced that Welsh steam coal was uniquely suited for powering the iron ships that were replacing wooden sailing vessels across the world. Nixon acquired extensive colliery interests in the Cynon Valley and the Merthyr area, establishing Nixon's Navigation Company, which became one of the most consistently profitable colliery operations in South Wales. His pits supplied coal to the Admiralty and to major shipping companies for decades. Records show that between 1856 and 1878, Nixon's Navigation Company paid significant royalties to the landlord Lord Aberdare alone, a figure that indicates the extraordinary volume of coal his pits were producing. By 1873, Nixon's company was among the largest in South Wales, and his name appeared regularly in government reports and parliamentary evidence on the coal industry. Nixon's Navigation Company continued operations well into the 20th century, with the firm's wage slips from around 1902 still showing workers at Seblem's Cynon Colliery drawing pay under the Nixon Company's name. The Nixon family's technical contribution, proving the global viability of Welsh steam coal, was arguably the single decision most responsible for the explosive growth of the South Wales coal field in the second half of the 19th century. Thomas Powell built the Powell-Dyffryn Empire from a single lease. Thomas Powell was born in 1880 and represents a slightly different trajectory from the great ironmasters. He was a Welsh coal owner rather than a manufacturer of iron, operating entirely within the steam coal trade that had come to define the economy of South Wales by the middle of the 19th century. Powell entered the coal industry by taking out leases in the Rhymney and Cynon valleys, and built his operations steadily through the 1840s and 1850s. The Powell-Dyffryn Steam Coal Company grew from these origins into one of the dominant commercial entities in the South Wales coalfield. Powell-Dyffryn collieries extended across multiple valleys, with particular concentration in the Aberdare and Rhymney areas. By the 1870s and 1880s, the company was among the largest coal-producing concerns in Britain. What distinguished the Powell-Dyffryn approach was systematic investment in infrastructure, in winding engines, in ventilation, and in the railway connections necessary to move coal efficiently from pit to port. The company also demonstrated a willingness to sink deeper shafts than many of its competitors, accessing seams that less capitalized operations could not reach. Powell Dufferin would eventually grow through acquisition and consolidation into one of the largest coal companies in Britain, absorbing numerous smaller concerns throughout the late 19th and early 20th centuries. By the time of nationalisation in 1947, when the National Coal Board took over Britain's coal industry, Powell Dufferin was among the major companies absorbed into the public sector. The family name had given rise to an industrial organisation that outlasted its founders by many decades. William Lewis, Lord Merthyr, built both coal and political power. William Thomas Lewis, born in 1837, represents the most complete fusion of industrial power and political influence in the history of the South Wales coalfield. The son of Thomas William Lewis, a colliery engineer, William Lewis spent his early career developing technical expertise in mine management before moving decisively into colliery ownership and coal trade organisation. By the 1870s, he had become one of the most powerful figures in the South Wales coal industry, combining ownership of significant colliery interests with a role as agent and manager for the Marquess of Bute's vast mineral estates in Glamorganshire. The Bute family owned the mineral rights beneath enormous tracts of the coalfield, and Lewis managed those interests with a consistent emphasis on maximum extraction and minimum concession to labour. He was a prominent opponent of trade union recognition and played a leading role in the formation and operation of the Coal Owners Association that negotiated, or refused to negotiate, with the emerging miners' unions throughout the last decades of the 19th century and the opening years of the 20th. In 1899, Lewis was elevated to the peerage as Lord Merthyr of Senghenydd, a title that named him after the valley where, 14 years later, 439 miners would die in the worst mining disaster in British history. Lewis was a Conservative politician and a member of the establishment that ran South Wales. His elevation to the peerage reflected both his commercial significance and his political usefulness to a Conservative government seeking allies in the industrial regions of Wales. He died in 1914, the same year that the First World War began transforming the political and economic landscape that had made him powerful. The Mabon generation turned miners into political force. William Abraham, known throughout the South Wales coalfield by his bardic name Mabon, was born in 1842 in Carmarthen, Port Talbot, the son of a copper worker. He began work in the pits as a young man, and by the 1870s had emerged as the most prominent representative of the miners' cause in the Rhondda Valley. Mabon was a contradictory figure by later standards, a genuine advocate for workers' rights who nonetheless believed in conciliation with employers and opposed the more confrontational tactics that would define the South Wales Miners' Federation after 1900. He was the driving force behind the Sliding Scale Agreement of 1875, which linked miners' wages to the selling price of coal, an arrangement that provided some protection against wage cuts during periods of falling prices, but also meant that workers' incomes fell whenever the coal market weakened. Mabon was elected as the Liberal Member of Parliament for the Rhondda constituency in 1885, becoming the first working miner to sit in the House of Commons for a Welsh constituency and one of the first trade union representatives in Parliament. He held the seat until 1920, a tenure of 35 years. His presence in Westminster gave the South Wales mining community a political voice at the centre of national power that it had never previously possessed. Mabon also served as president of the South Wales Miners' Federation from its foundation in 1898, though his instinct for conciliation increasingly brought him into conflict with younger, more militant members who would eventually push the federation toward affiliation with the Labour Party. The Miners' Federation of Great Britain, of which the South Wales Federation became a constituent part, was the largest trade union in Britain and the foundation of organised labour's political power. Mabon's generation, who walked out of the Liberal Party and into the Labour movement in the first years of the 20th century, permanently reshaped British electoral politics